Now let's talk about the setup process to get the Visual Spawner asset package working. First, I'll begin by creating our database manager. To do that, select Game Object, Game Native, Database Manager. This will create the database manager in the hierarchy for the scene, and if we click on it, we'll notice that it also creates the game database asset file. This asset file will contain all of the items that we create and our loot packages. Next, let's create a few items that we will use in our spawner. To do this, choose Window, Game Native, Item Manager. This will open the Item Manager interface window, and we can start by clicking on New Item and selecting that box that is created. Here we can populate this with the details about the item. We'll call this item Chest, and we'll say this container can hold items. We'll supply an image, which we have here. We'll give it a prefab. The prefab is what will spawn in the world space when this item actually spawns. So we have a demo chest here, which is just a pink rectangle. We're going to go ahead and select that. It's going to be an item. It's not going to be stackable, but it will be a container. So we'll make all of those selections. Now we'll add one more item. We're going to simply call this one box. And say this is just a box. We'll select an image for that one. Select its world prefab, which is a yellow box. And this one's not going to be a container, but it's going to be stackable. Alright, so we can either dock this window somewhere or we can close it. I'm going to go ahead and just drag it up here and go back over to our scene view. Next, let's create a loot package which can be placed inside of containers that we spawn in the world. So to do this, go to Window, Game Native, Loot Packages. We'll go ahead and click New Loot Package. Select the item that was created. We'll give it a name. We'll call it Loot Package number 1. And we'll go ahead and click to add an item to that package. And we'll click the ellipses to select an item. So here, you'll see the two items we created earlier. You'll see the chest and you'll see the box. We're going to go ahead and select the box, which will assign that item over here. And if we expand the details, we can set the chance that this item will spawn. 0 is 0% chance, while 1 is 100% chance that it will spawn. We'll put this one at 1, and we'll say the quantity of this item, we can set a maximum value and a minimum value, and then we can slide that entire range all together. So we'll leave it between 31 and 52. Now we'll add one more item, which we're also going to make a box, but we're going to give this one a 50% chance to spawn, so 0.5, and we'll leave its quantity at 1. Alright, so this one, we'll go ahead and just close this window. We could dock this one as well, but we'll just go ahead and close it. Alright, now let's create one of the spawn managers. To do this, select Game Object, Game Native, Visual Spawner, Spawn Manager. This will create the spawn manager, and here you'll see several properties which I'll come back to in a moment. To begin, we'll click Start Placement and select a location in the scene view. You can place as many spawners as you would like. This becomes useful when trying to establish spawn points in a world map or inside of a dungeon, for example. But for this demo, I only want one, so now I'll go ahead and click Stop Placement. You'll notice some of the properties here we can configure for the spawn manager, such as Show Area. This will enable and disable the visual guides. We can change the trigger color. We can change the spawn color. These become useful when you're trying to designate certain types of spawns, such as monster spawns, friendly NPCs, or just a typical item spawn location. You can pretty much color code them. Next, we'll assign our spawn layer, which we'll need to create. So we'll come up here to Layer, Add Layer. We'll call this Spawn. This layer can be anything that you would like. It can even be an existing layer. This layer is used to ensure that when items spawn, they don't overlap each other and they generate cleanly. So we'll come here and we'll assign that spawn layer. And we can also assign a trigger tag. This is the tag of any item that's going to actually trigger the spawn when it enters the trigger area. So we're going to set this one to player. Now that our spawner is created, we can select it by expanding the Spawn Manager. You'll notice several configurable properties for this spawner. Start immediately. When enabled, it will ignore the interval and spawn right away. Spawn Max. This will spawn all available spawns at once instead of one at a time. Spawn Amount. This is the total amount of spawns that can exist at one time. We'll go ahead and set this to 15. Spawn Interval is the frequency at which the spawner attempts to generate a new item. We'll leave this at 1 second, but you could also set that to minutes or hours. Despawn Interval. When the trigger area is empty, this is the delay before the spawns are destroyed. Clean Placement. When this is enabled, the items that match the spawn layer, which we set earlier, will not overlap each other. Random Rotation. When this is enabled, spawned items will have a random rotation value assigned. Spawn Effect. This can be any prefab, although it's typically a particle effect to spawn alongside the item when they're generated. Spawn Sound is played anytime a spawn occurs. Require Trigger. When this is enabled, the trigger area must be hit in order to generate the spawn. When this is disabled, the spawn will occur as soon as the scene loads. We can also come down here and set the trigger radius and the spawn radius. Typically, the trigger radius is bigger than the spawn radius, but it doesn't always have to be. For instance, you're setting a trap or something, so then when the player enters the trigger area, either items or monsters or traps can then spawn behind them. Now we'll go ahead and add some spawn items to this spawn. So we do that by clicking the plus sign under spawns. And the items we created earlier through our item database manager, we can select. So the first one we're going to choose is going to be a chest. And if we expand that, we can assign a loot package. We can also give it a locked level and a trapped level with the min-max slider value, and we can set that range. We can also change the chance that it will spawn. We'll leave this at 1. And we can also limit the spawn. So in this case, we have 15 total spawns which can occur. We can say that we never want more than 5 chests to occur in that spawn. Now let's go ahead and add a second item. We'll collapse this first one, and we'll make this one a box. And you'll see that this one doesn't have the loot package option because this one wasn't a container, this one was a stackable item. So instead, we can set the quantity. So this could be something such as potions or gold, anything that has a quantity value. And this one we're going to set to have a 50% chance to spawn. And this one we won't limit. Now in order to demonstrate this, let's go ahead and drop a character controller into the scene. And this one comes straight from the standard asset package, third-person controller. And we're going to make sure that we give this third-person controller the tag of player, so that when the player hits the spawn manager, it triggers that player tag. So now I'll go ahead and hit play and move into that spawn zone. You should see these items start to spawn, and you should notice that we don't get more than 5 chests spawning because we set that limit to 5. So everything else is going to fill up with those yellow boxes. You should also know that we have the random rotation applied as it was set in the spawner here. And we also have clean placement enabled, so none of these will actually overlap each other. And since we have a despawn interval of 1 second after we leave that spawn area, all these items will be destroyed. So remember the locked level and the trap level that we assigned to the chest? Included in this demo is a canvas which we'll drag into the scene, and when we click on those items, we'll be able to see the locked and trap level on the chest, as well as the items contained within the chest that come from the loot package. So under Visual Spawner Prefab, we'll drag canvas into the scene, and the only thing we need to do is on our spawner class, we'll add an event for onEnter, which will link to the canvas. User input, set spawn, and on onSpawn, we'll add an item. We'll link in the canvas. User input, spawned. Now when we hit play, you'll notice we have a user interface, and when we move forward into the spawn, we get some information about that spawn, and clicking on the items, in this case the chest, we can see the items inside of the chest, as well as their locked and trap level. And clicking between different ones, you can see how those values change, and the items inside also change. Because remember that second item we gave a 50% chance to also spawn. And if we click on one of the boxes, they'll simply disappear, and the spawner will be forced to create a new item to replace it on our 1 interval second that we have defined here. And that's it. That's all it takes to get up and running with the Visual Spawner asset package.